What you're seeking is also seeking you, but it won't call you twice. It won't linger on your doorstep, and it certainly won't wait if you keep hiding from yourself. In this audiobook, there are no magic formulas, no empty promises. Here you will hear truths that sting, ideas that unsettle, and phrases that will hurt if you've spent too long on pause. You're not here by accident. If this book found you, it's because you're already ready to stop waiting and start moving. Let's go. Chapter 1. The universe doesn't shift on luck. It shifts when you shift. You've been led to believe that you must wait. Wait for the perfect moment. Wait for the signs. Wait for everything to fall into place, as if the universe were quietly orchestrating the ideal plan while you sit still, fingers crossed. But let me tell you this, and listen closely. Nothing will move until you make the first move. The universe doesn't respond to the whispered promises you make when no one is watching. It responds to the courageous act of throwing yourself into the fray, even when the ground isn't guaranteed. It's not luck. It's not destiny. It's not a lucky break that changes your life. What changes your life is making uncomfortable decisions, when the easiest thing would be to keep postponing everything. Transformation begins the day you grow weary of your own story and decide to rewrite it from scratch, without seeking approval, without waiting for permission, regardless of how much the world around you trembles. Most people don't fail for lack of talent. They fail because they never challenge the status quo. They confuse patience with passivity, convincing themselves that the moment hasn't come yet, as if some cosmic clock would one day chime to say, "Now's the time." But there's no celestial fanfare marking the hour. What you'll find instead is discomfort, fear, doubt, and an inner urging that screams, "Try it now," even when nothing is clear. And if you ignore it, that urging falls silent, and your life stays stuck. We all know someone who was destined for more, brimming with potential, ideas, and good intentions, yet never made a move. And because they didn't move, the universe made no effort to clear a path. That's how the world works. It doesn't open doors out of kindness. It opens them when you start pushing, when you stop asking if you can and decide you will, guarantees or not. Yes, at first you'll crash. You likely won't get it right on the first try. You'll stumble, doubt yourself, and hear voices calling you crazy, hasty, foolish. But if you let those voices choose for you, you lose before you even start. No one else feels the urgency you do or truly understands why you need this change. Only you know the weight of never having tried. Some people don't need perfect clarity to act. They move anyway, not because they're naturally fearless, but because they've tested waiting and know it wears them down more than leaping. Those are the people who build things. They're not the most prepared or the smartest. They're the ones who dared lay the first brick while others were still drafting plans they'd never use. Your current reality isn't a mirror of your abilities. It's a mirror of your action or inaction. You can have 1,000 brilliant ideas, a moving life story, or a cause worth giving everything to. But if you do nothing, don't expect the universe to do it for you. You create motion. You provoke it. And once you do, everything else begins to turn. Not instantly or exactly how you pictured, but it turns. And the more you sustain that motion, the more answers emerge. Not by magic, but because you're generating traction. Where once there was stillness, now there is progress, however clumsy or slow, and that changes everything. You're not condemned to a mediocre life, because that's what fate handed you. You're there because you haven't moved enough to leave it behind. It's harsh to admit, but necessary. Because as long as you believe everything hinges on an external factor, you will keep waiting. And while you wait, you lose time. Worse, you get used to living on pause, romanticizing inertia, decorating stagnation with pretty excuses that you know, deep down, don't hold up. People who advance aren't more capable or gifted than you. They simply move. And by moving, they push their world towards something different. And in doing so, they change their own luck. Because luck is merely the visible result of an internal commitment, of a decision you uphold even when things go wrong, especially when they go wrong. The universe, if you want to call it that, doesn't answer your wishes. It answers your deeds. What you project without action is smoke. What you do, though imperfect, carries weight, makes itself heard. And that resonance, sooner or later, strikes the right chord. But it will never resonate if your only act is imagining, planning, or waiting for something to happen. Something is already happening. You just haven't decided to move. And this isn't about moving without direction or acting out of anxiety. It's about moving with intention. Even if you lack a perfect plan, even if you don't know step 10, you can take step 1. And by taking that first step, you break the inertia. You start building something. You tell the universe, "Here I am. I'm willing. I'm on the move." And only then do things begin to shift. Not because you're special, but because you stopped being passive. This chapter isn't a call to hustle for hustle's sake, nor an exaltation of empty productivity. It's a call to responsibility, to stop glamorizing waiting and start owning that the next level of your life doesn't depend on perfect alignment, but on daring to move when nothing yet makes sense. So look at your reality, where you are, how you live, what you do each day. And if you don't like what you see, if a voice inside you says you're not where you want to be, then move. If only a millimeter, if clumsily, if alone. Because that first, blind movement may be the gesture that changes everything. And when you begin to move, get ready. Because that's when the universe stops ignoring you. You've finally taken yourself seriously. Chapter 2. Waking up isn't pretty. It's violent. Waking up isn't the serene image self-help books sell you, nor that idyllic scene where one morning you rise with perfect clarity about who you are and where you're headed. Waking up isn't comfortable, gentle, or picturesque. It's an internal jolt that breaks everything because real awakening doesn't happen when you choose to change your life from a place of peace. It happens when you realize you've slept through too much, and that awareness cuts you like a knife. The first thing that shatters when you awaken is the image you had of yourself. That identity you built to fit in, to function, to survive. That version of you knew didn't fulfill you but was familiar. Suddenly you see it for what it is, a mask. And you realize you've spent years playing a role, living by rules you didn't write, doing what was right for everyone else while betraying your truest self. That revelation isn't pretty. There's no dramatic soundtrack or applause. There's vertigo, fury, and a void that swallows everything because you can no longer pretend you didn't see it. Once you see the cracks, you can't look away. You might try to patch them, keep repeating, "It's not the right time," or pretend nothing's happening. But you know. And knowing hurts, because it means you alone are responsible now. Before, you could blame the system, your past, your circumstances. Once you awaken, excuses run dry, because the moment you see clearly, you must act with that knowledge. Awakening forces you to question everything: relationships, habits, your work, your beliefs, even your self-talk. Nothing remains untouched. That isn't a calm experience. It's an internal firestorm where you don't know what to save, because revisiting your life with new eyes reveals too many pieces that no longer fit, pieces you cannot hold on to without betraying yourself. And that's where the hardest part begins. Letting go without guarantees, releasing without knowing what comes next, making painful choices that mean leaving behind familiar, even if toxic, ground that once gave you some comfort. Waking up confronts you with the fact that you played an active role in your own stalling. No one forced you to stay silent, to accept less than you wanted, to shrink your dreams to avoid friction. You chose adaptation. You said yes when you wanted to say no. You stayed when you should have left. And though all that once made sense, the blow still lands. Now you see you could have chosen differently. And that, rather than liberate, initially weighs you down. Because you awaken with guilt, confusion, and a mix of desire to start anew, and fear at having wasted so much time. It isn't unusual to feel alone after awakening, because you start seeing things others aren't ready to see. What once bonded you to certain people now suffocates you. Conversations that once fit now ring hollow. Routines you once enjoyed now feel like chains. You who once thrived on autopilot can no longer stand another moment in that mode. That distance isn't imaginary. It's very real and often painful, because it means moving away from what once defined you, even if it no longer did you any good. For that reason, awakening isn't always celebrated. It can be mourned, even cried over, carried quietly amid the incomprehension of those still asleep. And yet, once awakened, you can't go back. No matter how much you try, no matter how much you long to recapture that false sense of peace, you know now, and knowing changes everything. Even if you don't have all the answers or know exactly where to go, you know you cannot stay where you were. Because now you see, now you feel, and you refuse to live from inertia any longer. It's curious how, after that first shock, a new kind of clarity emerges. Not immediate or pristine, but genuine. A clarity that doesn't promise smooth sailing, but restores your power to choose. And that's the greatest gift of all. It's not about finding the perfect path. It's about reclaiming the ability to face your life and say, enough. Even if you don't know what follows. Even if your legs shake. Because it's no longer about knowing. It's about refusing to ignore the obvious. Awakening is violent because it tears down. But it also rebuilds from a different foundation, forcing you to stop living as if your life were an endless draft you'd someday perfect. It thrusts you into the present and demands you inhabit it. No more postponing decisions. No more sacrificing authenticity for acceptance. No more compromising your truth to keep the peace. In this process, you will lose things. Security, maybe people, perhaps places. But what you gain, if you dare sustain the movement, is far greater. Presence, awareness, the chance to shape a life that needs no masks or justifications. And though it feels terrifying at first, it becomes the only true way to live, not according to others' expectations, but according to what you choose to be. Awakening isn't a single moment. It's a domino effect. Each time you choose honesty, each time you speak your truth with trembling voice, each time you act from feeling rather than expectation, you awaken again. You peel away another layer of that domesticated self you built to survive, but no longer suffices to truly live. So don't feel guilty if you're uncomfortable. Don't misinterpret pain as a sign you've gone astray. It's proof you're awake, because the worst alarm isn't feeling too much. It's feeling nothing at all. You are changing because you can no longer stay the same. Your body, your mind, your intuition, everything within you calls for a new way of being. And though it hurts, and though you cannot see what lies ahead, this rupture is your greatest opportunity yet. Not to become someone new, but to reclaim what was always inside you, buried under years of conditioning, fear, and complacency. Awakening isn't pretty, but it is real. And once you start living from that truth, there's no turning back. Chapter 3. Your excuses sound exactly like your fears. There's a gentle voice inside you that speaks in soft tones, masquerading as prudence, logic, or common sense. It always has an argument ready for why now isn't the right time, why you still need to wait. why it's better to hold off. That voice doesn't shout. It seduces you with subtle thoughts that sound convincing. And before you know it, you obey them as if they carried the ultimate wisdom. But if you truly pause to listen, if you examine its tone and honestly scrutinize its message, you'll discover something uncomfortable. That voice isn't reasonable, it's cowardly. And the worst part is, it speaks with your accent. Your excuses are nothing more than your fears dressed in politeness. Fears made to sound like common sense, hidden behind phrases that feel responsible, but exist only to protect you from what terrifies you most: failing, exposing yourself, or simply not meeting your own expectations. Excuses aren't what you think. They aren't miscalculations or poorly made decisions. They are refuges. Mental hideouts you slip into whenever one part of you wants to grow and another part, the part that spent a lifetime shielding you from pain, whispers that it's better not to try. And because that side of you knows you so well, it knows exactly how to persuade you. By talking about a lack of time, about fatigue, about responsibility, knowing you'll nod along because you've been taught to equate self-protection with inaction. You start by saying it's not a good time. You have other priorities. You need to feel more prepared first. You have to wait until circumstances improve. You repeat it so often you eventually believe it. But viewed from the outside, you'll see your excuses never change. The situation morphs. The goal changes. Your life stage shifts. But the story remains identical. The same reasons, the same delays, the same polite voice telling you you'll have your chance later. Here's the key. If your excuses are so predictably alike, it's because they don't describe reality. They describe the fear you have of changing it. That repetition isn't coincidence. It's defense. And it works, because fear doesn't need to shout. It simply needs to borrow the language of reason so you never question it. At some point, you must be brutally honest with yourself. Ask plainly, is this what I truly believe? Or is this a comfortable lie keeping me rooted in place? Are these self-imposed limits real external barriers? Or walls I've grown used to not climbing? Because after years of justifying your inaction, you no longer know whether you're being realistic or simply following the story that spares you the challenge of moving. Yes, moving forward is scary. Nobody denies that. But remaining trapped in excuses that sound like solid logic is a slow form of self-abandonment. Each time you say, it's not the right moment, you pause something that must start now. Each time you rationalize your paralysis with polished arguments, you erode your self-trust, and that habit becomes part of your identity. Eventually, you don't just use excuses, you become one. The problem isn't having fear. It's normalizing it so thoroughly you don't even call it fear. You call it planning, commitment, realism. Yet deep down you know you could do this, but you've chosen not to, and that realization stings. But it also liberates. Once you own that the break is inside you, you reclaim the power to release it. You don't need to banish fear. You simply need to refuse its veto. No heroic bravery is required. Just exhaustion. The moment comes when you're so fed up with your own narrative you can't bear hearing it again. That's when real change begins. Not because you're suddenly inspired, but because you're tired of your own lies. Because you can't keep telling yourself you lack time when you spend hours on distractions. Because you can no longer convince yourself you're not ready when you know all you need is to start. Sometimes transformation doesn't spring from inspiration, but from sheer weariness. Realizing you're running in circles and finally seeing the only real obstacle is you, with your elaborate justifications. From that point, if you have the courage to see your life unvarnished, the system starts to unravel. You don't need to understand every detail. You only need to stop pretending you don't see the obvious. No one is holding you back. No one is chaining you. The chains are mental, phrases you repeat daily so convincingly you believe them unquestioningly. But if you dismantle them one by one, you'll see they all share one origin: fear of failure, of exposure, of losing control. And fears don't vanish, but they don't need to run the show either. You can begin without knowing the whole path. You can advance without perfect clarity. What you must not do is keep feeding the same story every time a part of you wants to grow, because you know that story no longer serves you. You can't keep disguising fear as reason. You weren't born to prove you can't. You were born to prove you can. That moment arrives when you stop speaking as a victim, when you stop negotiating with your boundaries and simply do what you know you must. No more delays, no more embellishments, just your decision and the action that follows. Chapter 4. Truth won't set you free. Action will. We've been taught that simply uncovering truth will liberate us, that once you see things as they are, some kind of awakening happens, magically transforming your life. And while understanding your reality is a necessary first step, let's be blunt. It isn't enough. Truth alone moves nothing. It doesn't change your life to recognize something isn't working. You must act on that knowledge, because knowing is not doing. And those who know but don't act only accumulate frustration. You can possess a painful clarity about what's wrong. You can perfectly map the patterns you repeat, the wounds conditioning you, the self-sabotages haunting you. You can hold the entire blueprint in front of you and still not budge. Because without action, truth becomes dead weight. It sits there. You see it, you understand it, but you don't use it. And instead of feeling freed, you feel trapped by your own awareness. Nothing exhausts you more than seeing what limits you and continuing to hold on out of habit. Knowing a relationship drains you, yet remaining in it. Knowing your work depletes you, yet pretending each morning that all is well. Knowing you're living half a life yet playing along like everything's under control. That awareness without action inflicts silent wear because you can neither unsee what you know nor change what you won't act on. Many comfort themselves in this in-between space, not fully asleep, but not fully awakened either. They linger in perpetual analysis, endless reflection, therapy without real steps, books read without decisions made, deep insights without tangible shifts. They fool themselves into believing they're progressing when in fact they're running laps around the same track, stuck in the comfort of understanding but shunning transformation. Freedom doesn't come from understanding what's wrong. It comes from doing something about it. It arrives when you translate insight into decision. Those decisions aren't always dramatic heroics. Often they're small but decisive. Saying no where you always said yes, placing boundaries, refusing to justify what's unjustifiable, rising and acting despite fear. That's where the real movement begins. Not in thought, but in deed. Some believe they must have everything figured out before they act. That they need perfect clarity, total emotional preparation, a fully mapped route. That's another trap. Because some truths only become clear once you've acted. Some wounds only heal when you stop poking at them. Some processes advance only once you step forward. And until you make that step, knowing alone changes nothing. Don't mistake depth for paralysis. Don't get lost in perpetual analysis of your emotions, patterns, or past. Self-awareness is valuable only if it propels action. Knowledge doesn't take the place of action. It primes it, ignites it. But without movement, without risk, without real shifts in behavior, you're merely a bystander in your own life. Yes, acting on truth is uncomfortable. It demands coherence. You can no longer do what you've always done. You must behave differently. Make decisions that hurt because they mean letting some things go. Holding up to the judgments of those who don't follow your transformation. But it also means winning yourself. And that pain, though real, is the fuel that drives you forward. Sometimes the crucial moment comes down to a single question. Are you going to do something with this? Or will you keep running on mental treadmill, And that question, asked without fluff or evasion, marks a before and after. Either you begin to move or resign yourself to a life of knowing more and doing nothing. And that resignation, that elegant surrender, is fear. Fear of failing, fear of exposure, fear of unpreparedness. But action is the only antidote to that fear. Not theory, not introspection, but movement. Real transformation isn't pretty. Sometimes it begins with a tiny, almost invisible choice that means everything to you. You know it shifts the game, because it breaks the cycle, challenges your pattern, interrupts the endless loop of safe repetition. The first time you do it, even in silence, something unlocks. Not outside, inside. Because at last you're aligning what you know with what you do. And that is the only freedom worth having. The freedom born of coherence between truth and action. Don't wait for the perfect moment, perfect clarity, or absence of fear. If you do, you'll stay stuck. And the worst misery isn't not knowing what to do. It's knowing what to do and refusing to do it. That, more than any exterior barrier, is your real prison. Truth can hurt, confront you, leave you raw. But the only way truth becomes a catalyst is the decision you make next. Everything else is just talk. Everything else is ego masquerading as self-knowledge. Decide. Choose to act on what you know, not on what you lack. Choose to step out of your story rather than keep rehearsing it, even if you fumble. Because only those who turn truth into deed transform their lives. The rest only understand, and understanding alone is never enough. Chapter 5. Chaos isn't a mistake. It's the push you needed. When everything starts to tremble, we instinctively believe something has gone wrong, that we failed, strayed off course, been abandoned by fate, or lost control. In panic, we search for explanations, dissect every detail, ask when exactly it all went sideways, as if chaos were an accident or an error in the system. But it's not. Not always. Sometimes chaos doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to yank you from a place where you've been quietly surviving for far too long. It arrives when nothing else can wake you up, when you ignore so many small warnings that only a mighty shake can return you to center. Yes, it's uncomfortable, disorienting, forces you to watch structures you thought solid crumble, and for that very reason, it can be profoundly necessary. Without that collapse, you'd keep upholding a facade of stability that was never truly alive. Chaos gives no warning. It hits you like a sudden problem, a rupture, a loss so brutal it knocks the wind out of you. For a moment you resist, cling to the fragments that slip away, fight to sustain what no longer makes sense. Because from inside, everything feels like ruin. But what you can't see, what you may not want to admit, is that those ruins were essential foundations. On them, nothing living could grow, at least not something true to who you are right now. The hardest thing about chaos isn't what it takes, but what it compels you to see. It confronts you with everything you've been postponing, with choices you've avoided, with truths you've hidden. It drags you out of comfort zones that once felt safe, but had turned suffocating. In that first moment of overwhelm, you're lost. Your landmarks, supports, familiar names vanish. Everything you leaned on evaporates. All that's left is you, your choices, and the raw materials for rebuilding. What makes chaos so revealing is that if you pay attention, you'll notice it didn't arrive by chance. It was preceded by subtle signs, building tension, rising discomfort, an inner voice growing louder until you just couldn't shut it out. But you ignored them because you were busy, because obligations, because you told yourself it wasn't the time. Meanwhile, you piled on the internal noise, unwittingly holding up the unsustainable, until the breaking point came. And when it did, there was no room to negotiate. You had to admit that something had to change, right now. You may want to blame everything outside yourself, but if you dare stop and look, you'll understand that chaos isn't here to punish you. It's here to hold up a mirror, not to annihilate, but to free you from a version of yourself that no longer fits reality, to shake you awake when you've been hitting snooze for too long. And though you wish you'd seen it coming, you didn't. And now that you're here, amid the wreckage, you realize the most important question isn't how you fell, but what you do next. You might feel you're losing everything. Others may think you've made a terrible mistake, but you know deep down something vital is realigning within you. Something previously hidden, something raw and unfiltered, something that doesn't sport a script or a story. And though you may have preferred a more gradual nudge, this upheaval is the only thing that truly roused you. You've been ignoring hints that life wanted you to mobilize, and now you can't hide anymore. Above all, chaos forces a choice. Not between good and bad, but between real and comfortable. If you choose the real, you embrace the discomfort. You stay present in the unknown. You decide to rebuild with honesty rather than patch the past. It demands you stop living in a perpetual draft you'll one day correct, and instead inhabit each moment with courage, even when it means stepping into the void. In that void, you'll lose familiar certainties, but you'll gain something far greater. The chance to craft your life without masks or noises. To make decisions because they align with your truth, not because they fit the old blueprint. And that, despite the fear and the fall, holds the key to genuine freedom. So don't flee from chaos. Don't curse it. Honor it. Listen to its lesson. Because it may not be the end of your world. It may be the beginning of everything you truly want. You've been pushed to the brink so that finally you might step in the direction you've long been avoiding. Chapter 6. If you don't choose, life chooses for you. There's a subtle way to surrender without it looking like surrender. It's called indecision, and it's a master of disguise. Sometimes it masquerades as prudence, other times as patience. Sometimes it even parades around as common sense. But at its core, what's happening is simple. You're avoiding a choice, not because you don't know what you want or lack options, but because you know that whichever path you pick, you'll have to face its consequences. And that weighs heavily. Real choice demands closing doors, and we've been taught to leave them all ajar, just in case. What nobody tells you is that not choosing is itself a choice. Not deciding, not acting, not moving, not taking a stand. All carry a cost. One you don't pay up front, but that eventually comes due. Because when you don't choose, life doesn't pause to wait. Life chooses for you. And it does so by default, by inertia, by what surrounds you, by others' expectations, by what's easiest. And suddenly you find yourself somewhere you never intended to be, doing things untrue to you, with people you never consciously picked, trapped in routines you never designed yet. Now feel like home. That's the problem with postponing big decisions. They don't vanish, they merely morph. They hide in the life you build by omission. One day you wake up realizing you're living a life you never chose. Not because someone forced it on you, but because you stood by as it quietly assembled itself. And when that happens, it's easy to blame circumstances, your environment, even destiny. But if you're honest, you'll admit that what was missing wasn't opportunity but courage. It isn't about deciding hastily or diving in without thought. It's about acknowledging that some moments won't allow you to hide behind, "I'll decide later." Because while you deliberate, listing pros and cons that never end, life is making decisions in your stead. It does so with the precision of one who ignores your wishes and follows your passivity. Inertia is a powerful force. If you don't cut it off, it drags you along, and it never forgives. People live years in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, cities that wither them, versions of themselves they no longer recognize, simply because they never made a timely choice. And when they finally muster the will to decide, they find it's harder. Commitments, responsibilities, structures built around something never truly theirs have formed, and escaping feels like open-heart surgery. That's why choosing early is so vital. Not when everything collapses, but before. To choose with awareness, with intention, from that part of you that already knows where you want to go, but sometimes silences itself out of fear of being wrong. Yes, real choice carries risk, but so does indecision, only more slowly, more invisibly, and far more irreversibly. Freedom doesn't lie in endless options. It lies in knowing how to choose and then owning that choice. Because when you truly choose, everything aligns. Your steps, your decisions, your relationships, your energy. You're no longer divided, no longer fragmented, no longer playing a role at odds with your inner truth. And that brings peace, not because everything is perfect, but because you know you're walking your own path, not one you inherited, accepted out of pressure, or unconsciously built while you distracted yourself. Your path, and that is worth any comfort you sacrificed. There comes a point when knowing isn't enough. Seeing clearly, recognizing what's wrong, none of that suffices. Now you must choose. Because every day you delay, you reinforce what already exists. You feed the structure that supports you but also confines you. And that kind of support has a steep price: your authenticity. To choose means to let go. And that word, let go, is one many barely dare speak. Yet letting go of what no longer suits you isn't losing. It's making space. It's clearing the ground to let something new grow. Because if you cling to everything, if you want it all, if you refuse to leave anything behind, you end up carrying a life you can't sustain. And in that overload, you lose focus, energy, direction. Some people have everything, except direction. Not because they don't know where to go, but because they never dared commit to anything. They kept every option open, always a plan B, C, D. And in their attempt never to close a door, they ended up belonging to nothing. And that exhaustion is worse than failure. For living divided drains more than betting on something and failing. Choosing doesn't guarantee success, but not choosing guarantees wear and tear, disconnects you, makes you feel life is moving on without you, leaves you watching the years pass while you keep spinning the same idea you never dared act on. When that happens, it's no longer the failures that hurt most, but the things you never tried. The cowardice dressed up as caution stings harshest when you look back and realize that your struggles weren't a matter of luck, but of choice. You're not here to fulfill other scripts, least of all to keep a story they wrote for you. You're here to choose, and yes, that will bring conflict. Sometimes with your surroundings, sometimes with your own doubts. But it's part of the process. No one who truly chooses themselves emerges unscathed. Yet everyone who does ends up living more awake, more aligned, more at peace. So don't wait for life to make your decisions. Don't give it that power. Don't let indecision become your way of life, for what you don't choose consciously always morphs into your routine, becomes your norm, and if you tolerate it long enough, eventually feels normal. Until one morning you wake up, you look around, and recognize nothing. Not the place, not the people, not yourself. Choose, even if your world shakes. Even if guarantees are nowhere in sight. Even if no one understands. Because only from that decision does the life meant for you begin. The life that doesn't build itself, that isn't inherited, that only shows up when you step up, when you take a stand, when you dare to say, this yes, this no, and then hold your ground, come what may. Chapter 7. You're not broken. You're under construction. Some days you feel something inside you is malfunctioning. You can't tell whether it's your body, your mind, your spirit, or all three at once. but you feel the weight. You struggle to rise, not because the world is crushing you, but because the world no longer fits as it once did. Nothing quite excites you anymore. Words ring hollow, routine suffocates, and you watch yourself from the outside, unrecognizingly. In that odd silence, you begin to believe you're broken. That's natural. When you've held on too long, carried wounds that never healed, stifled your emotions to avoid overwhelming others, you eventually start to think the problem lies within you, that some inner piece cracked and you can't put it back together. And that's when you're most vulnerable. Because if you convince yourself you're broken, it becomes easy to give up, to accept a damaged identity defined by pain, guilt, or a sense of incompleteness. But here's what you need to hear. You're not broken. You're not defective. You're not an error that needs fixing. You're a work in progress. You're evolving. You're shedding old versions of yourself that no longer reflect who you are. And though that transition hurts, it isn't a sign of fracture. It's a sign of growth. Internal construction isn't tidy or linear, and it's rarely pretty. It means dismantling parts of yourself that you fortified over the years, parts that once protected you, parts that helped you survive certain times but now are constricting. And of course, it hurts to let them go. No matter how dysfunctional they've become, they provided stability. Now that you're tearing them down, you feel unsteady, vulnerable, incomplete. But that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're refashioning your identity. Being under construction means accepting that some inner spaces aren't yet finished. Spaces in chaos, spaces where clarity is just peeking in, spaces where you haven't quite decided what to build. And yes, that is uncomfortable, because we're taught to present ourselves as solid, whole, functional. Yet there are seasons in life when the bravest thing you can do is admit you're uncertain, dismantle your facade, and from the rubble, choose what to rebuild. The wound doesn't define you, but it runs through you, and it's okay to acknowledge it. It's okay to say, I'm struggling, I'm unsure, I'm hurting. Not to stay stuck, not to claim victimhood, but to recognize where you stand. Because you can't construct something stable on foundations you refuse to inspect. Pretending everything's fine, glossing over issues, dodging discomfort, those only prolong the process. True strength isn't denying you're shaken, it's owning it and rising despite it. There's enormous pressure to always show your best self, to progress nonstop, to have answers, to fit neatly. But growth often calls for a pause. Sometimes the bravest act isn't forging ahead as if nothing's wrong, but allowing yourself to crumble, to feel, to dismantle without shame. And then, from the remnants, build something new. Not out of a need to be better, but because the old you no longer supports the life you want. We confuse pain with failure, believing any hurt signals a misstep. Yet some pain is essential. Pain from growth, from transformation, from recalibration. It's like muscle soreness after a deep stretch. It signals you're activating something previously dormant, and though it's uncomfortable, it's a sign of expansion, not injury. Each construction phase brings contradictions. Some days you feel you've gained presence, clarity, strength. The next you slip into old patterns and berate yourself for not doing better. But that's the process. Real change isn't a straight ascent. It's a messy journey, a step forward, 2 back, 3 sideways. What matters is direction, not perfection. If you keep checking inward, if you keep choosing consciously despite missteps, you're moving. Part of you wants quick results, a clear finish line, certainty, but another part knows you can't rush real construction. Some lessons only come from living them, not just reading about them. And as painful as that can be, you're doing something profound. You're giving shape to yourself from within, and even if it goes unnoticed externally, that inner work is a profound act of dignity. You're not broken. You're under construction. You're unpacking layers that no longer serve you, facing what you long hid, daring to voice the unspoken. And that alone is enough. You don't need to race ahead, to prove anything, or shine perfectly through the transformation. You just need to keep going, day by day, with whatever remains, with your own spark. Don't let anyone dictate how you should be. Don't buy the myth that you must always be strong, quick, or crystal clear. You know what you carry. You know what you're working through. And honoring that process is what starts the real healing. Because construction isn't about returning to who you were. It's about building something new that aligns with who you are becoming. You might not see the results yet. You might not recognize your reflection. You might struggle to find words for your state. But that doesn't mean you're stalled. It means you're in the thick of it, in the rawest, most authentic stage, when there are no masks, no scripts, just you with your fragments, your drive, and your attempt. So don't pressure yourself to be okay. Don't blame yourself for being in process. Don't compare yourself to those who appear to have it together. Everyone travels their own path, at their own pace, with their own scars. You're making yours, even if no one applauds it, even if no one fully understands it, even if you can't yet put it into words. Because deep down, what matters isn't how far you've come. It's that you continue. That you're constructing something from the inside that resonates with your truth, not from duty, fear, or external expectation, but from that intimate place you finally refuse to keep silent. Chapter 8. Misunderstood spirituality. Numbs you. There's a way to disconnect from life that doesn't look like escape or defeat. It masquerades as calm, awareness, spiritual growth. Subtly, even socially approved, because it feels elevated, wise, enlightened. But it's still a trap. A different cage painted in softer colors. That cage is misunderstood spirituality. When spirituality becomes avoidance, it stops being a path and turns into anesthesia. A sophisticated way to avoid facing reality. To justify passivity with pretty words. To cloak fear in incense smoke. To excuse inaction with everything happens for a reason, or trust the universe. Yes, perhaps everything does have meaning, but that doesn't mean you have no role. That you needn't get your hands dirty, make hard decisions, have uncomfortable conversations, or move forward trembling. Spirituality doesn't lie in hushed tones. It doesn't mean avoiding conflict, nor remaining perpetually peaceful. That ideal of the constantly serene soul isn't wisdom. It's denial. Because there are times when peace isn't the answer. Times when you must burn with purpose, raise your voice, slam your hand on the table. Act in ways that defy any bland mantra, but save your spirit. If your spiritual practice leads you away from reality, if it disconnects you from your body or prevents you from feeling anger, sorrow, desire, discomfort, then it isn't helping you evolve, it's sedating you. You might need less ritual, fewer esoteric symbols, fewer trips for cosmic signs, and more courage to engage with what's happening here and now. Sometimes the true message isn't in the tarot or the astral plane you crave. It's in the anger you repress, the boundary you refuse to place, the life you tolerate while you hide behind high-vibration slogans. Being spiritual isn't speaking softly, avoiding conflict, or claiming unbroken peace. That image we've internalized of a person who accepts everything, forgives all, and never wavers, is not wisdom. It's a mask. There are moments when spiritual maturity demands fierce engagement with life's challenges, making choices that no mantra sanctions, but that rescue your soul. When spirituality becomes a shield against responsibility, when nice-sounding mantras replace action, you're not growing. You're numbing. You may momentarily quell anxiety, but you slow your momentum. You feel fleeting calm, but your inner life dulls. You pretend everything is perfect, yet your spirit quietly withers. True growth isn't a float above life. It's a dive deep into it, into your body, your conflicts, your doubts. It means stopping the search for signs overhead and starting to trust your own inner voice. Sometimes that means ruffling feathers, confronting pain, calling out injustice, actions that no polished spiritual teaching supports, but that spring from authenticity. Don't abandon belief. Abandon the misuse of belief to dodge your own work. Don't trade your fear for pious phrases. Don't fill your vocabulary with sacred words you don't live. Listen honestly to yourself. Decide without seeking external permission. Act from what you feel, not from what you read. And if that alienates you from some circles, so be it. Autonomy often costs solitude. A depth of spirit isn't measured by how many retreats you attend or how many buzzwords you know. It's measured by how much truth you can hold, by the coherence between your words and your deeds, by your ability to face your shadow without gloss or glossing over, by your willingness to be human without assuming a guru's persona. Yes, you might feel alone at first. You might lose guides you once admired. You might seem out of step. But that is part of the journey. Because ceasing to anesthetize yourself means returning to feeling. And to feel real, raw, unfiltered, sometimes hurts. But it's the only way back to yourself, to your body, to your voice, to your power to choose from within rather than hide behind borrowed platitudes. If you truly want to grow, stop looking outside for what only you can build inside. Stop painting fear as faith. Stop reciting words you don't practice. Start listening without filters, deciding without external approval, acting from your own urge, not a script. Even if that means breaking with certain teachings you once loved. There's a spirituality beyond labels, lived rather than talked about. And when you arrive there, you no longer need to escape. You simply inhabit your life fully. Chapter 9. Nothing changes if you don't change. Everyone wants things to get better. Peace, purpose, fulfillment. But few are willing to touch what truly needs addressing. Few look inward with real honesty. Few ask themselves whether they haven't become the common denominator in every situation, reacting the same way, thinking the same thoughts, making the same choices. That's where everything stalls. Because no matter how much you want change, how vividly you visualize it, how many books you read or tips you hear, if you don't alter your own patterns, the external world will replay the same dynamics in different costumes. You'll end up at the same crossroads, not because you're cursed, but because you keep walking in the same shoes. Hoping your life transforms without examining your habits is like wanting to cross a river without getting wet. You want outward order, but refuse to soil your hands. You want new opportunities, new people, new experiences, yet avoid the discomfort of inner work, of letting go of habits that no longer fit. It doesn't work that way. You can change location, relationship, job, routine, but if you don't change yourself, it will be the same story with new characters. Your mindset, your relationships, your self-talk, your reactions, your place in the world. These are the architects of your reality. If you don't dismantle and rebuild them, nothing you construct can stand. And facing that is painful, because admitting you're the constant in your challenges means admitting responsibility for what isn't happening. Change hurts because it demands giving up parts of yourself you've grown accustomed to. Attitudes that once protected you but now confine you. Ways of being you've repeated so often they seem innate, yet they're learned, borrowed, chosen under fear's shadow, and now they no longer serve you, though you still wear them like a second skin. Worst of all, you may not even notice. Real change demands presence, not autopilot. You can't do it on repeat modes. You must face your emotions, your blind spots, your unexamined fears, especially how you respond when no one's watching. That's the true test of whether your inner work bears fruit externally. You're not trapped. You're repeating. You repeat toxic dynamics not out of masochism, but because familiarity feels safe. It tells you what to expect, spares you from new uncertainties, and so you endure the discomfort of staying put rather than risk the bigger discomfort of real change. But a day comes when you can't fool yourself any longer, and if you've read this far, that day has arrived for you. People who truly evolve don't wait for perfect motivation or guru instructions. They change because they're fed up with themselves. One day they look in the mirror and say, "I can't live this way anymore." It's not about perfection, it's about integrity. Stopping the cliché of self-help while continuing to live unchanged. This isn't criticism, it's a wake-up call. If something inside you shifts at these words, you know parts of your life desperately need brave attention. Pending choices, unsaid words, deferred changes. You sense you've been holding off on certain moves, and you know until you make them, nothing outside will satisfy you. You can pursue external fixes, new scenery, new relationships, but without inner change, the same patterns follow you. Your life will morph back into familiar shapes because the pattern travels with you. Knowing that scares you. You don't want to admit how complicit you are. But once you do, you reclaim power. If you're the author of your story, you can also rewrite it. Chapter's not over. This is a pivotal crossroads. The real difference awaits in what you choose now. Either keep standing still or make your move. And when you change, everything you need to transform externally will begin to shift. Chapter 10. Stop searching for motivation. Learn to sustain discipline. You're waiting for the perfect moment, the near magical instant when you'll wake up with clarity, energy, drive. You wait to feel truly inspired, to find that burst of enthusiasm that propels you forward. You've been postponing projects, routines, conversations, decisions, waiting for a motivation that flares up briefly, then vanishes without warning. Meanwhile, days slip past, excuses pile up, your momentum cools, and so does your faith in yourself. You've been sold the idea that you need inspiration to progress, that once you discover a big enough why, everything else just flows. But that's only half the story. Because even when you find your spark, when you know exactly what you want, if you don't learn to keep your commitment alive when the spark dims, you'll end up nowhere. Enthusiasm ebbs, discipline endures. This is where many people get stuck, confusing emotion with direction. They wait to feel before they act, rather than act to maintain the course. And that distinction is crucial. There will be days when you feel nothing special. No excitement, no surge of energy, no clarity. Days when the last thing you want is to honor your commitments. If in those days you pause, you freeze, you wait for another feeling-based cue, then your progress becomes hostage to a mood you cannot control. You must realize, discipline isn't a cage, rigid and joyless. It's the very mechanism that carries you forward when desire wanes, when inspiration deserts you, when your mind conjures 1,000 reasons to quit. Discipline is the tool that yields real results, the structure you build when the novelty fades, the promise you uphold long after the initial thrill. Yes, it's demanding. Anything worth having demands effort. But so is any worthwhile endeavor. Seeking motivation is fine, but depending on it is perilous. It's like building on clouds. It feels lofty and light, but it vanishes when the weather turns. Discipline, however, is your foundation, your bedrock. It's the resolve you honor even when you don't want to. The habit you cultivate regardless of your emotional state. It's the pact you keep with yourself, unbending. Without it, you fall prey to every fleeting feeling. Some reject discipline as too rigid, arguing for flow, for following one's feelings, for self-care. While self-compassion is vital, too often it becomes a euphemism for shirking tough commitments. You disguise laziness as mindfulness, hide fear behind the guise of well-being, drape inertia in the cloak of self-respect. But at some point you must choose. Do you let inertia run the show? Or do you wrest back control? Truly disciplined people don't rely on endless inspiration to perform. They show up even when they don't feel like it, honor their word to themselves, push forward even through fatigue, and that consistency yields results that stay. It builds integrity, trust, resilience, qualities no fleeting inspiration can replace. Yes, begins with motivation. That spark is the ignition. But then you switch on the engine of discipline. You keep moving even when the spark goes out. You do the work, no matter how small, because you know results come through repetition and perseverance, not fresh bursts of enthusiasm. You know that true freedom comes when you can rely on yourself, not on external or internal mood swings. So stop waiting for motivation as a condition. Stop asking your emotions for permission. Start training that part of you that rises regardless, shows up regardless, moves regardless. That part that no longer negotiates your commitments. That part that knows results aren't born of divine inspiration, but of disciplined action. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be consistent. And that consistency, day by day, will transform you into someone who no longer needs to feel fired up to do what must be done, because you've cultivated the discipline to see it through, no matter what. Chapter 11. If it doesn't make you uncomfortable, it won't transform you. Real change isn't pleasant. It isn't a breezy, feel-good walk full of gentle revelations and pretty quotes. When you change in earnest, it jolts you to your core. It forces you to face what you've spent years dodging, your fears, your laziness, your contradictions. Transformation doesn't come from comfort. You can't revolutionize your entire life without exposing your blind spots, without plowing through the parts of yourself you've learned to gloss over just to keep treading water. Think of that version of you that shrinks down to fit in, the one that won't speak up because it doesn't want to rock the boat, the one that tells itself it's not that big of a deal, while it swallows every emotion. That part needs to be unsettled. If you don't interrupt it, it will keep doing exactly the same thing, again and again. Not because you're weak, but because you're wired to survive, not to transform. Transformation comes later, when you decide you're done merely surviving, and you begin to move forward even though it hurts, even though it's hard, even though it rattles your deepest layers. And yes, that journey feels awful at first, because you're not only changing your circumstances, you're dismantling the version of yourself you built to survive within them. You're breaking down habits, roles, relationships, and beliefs you've carried for years. Even knowing they no longer serve you, letting them go creates a void, an inner vertigo that can paralyze you. Because painful as the old patterns were, they were at least familiar. At least you knew how to exist there. The unfamiliar? That scares you, leaves you bare, forces you to feel what you've spent so long drowning out with noise, busyness, and rationalizations. This is why so many people begin grand transformations, only to abandon them halfway. They weren't warned that the road would be rough. That discomfort isn't a glitch in the system. It's the ticket price for growth. That if you don't feel resistance, if you don't wrestle with your own inertia, if you don't have moments when you want to turn back, then you're not really transforming. You're only remodeling your facade, tweaking the superficial so everything deep down stays the same. True change doesn't sweep you aside. It cuts straight through you. It dismantles your script, your mask. It demands raw presence. And it's inside that unsettled space, where you're no longer who you were but not yet who you'll become, that actual alchemy occurs. There are no rehearsed lines, no comfort zones. Only you. Sometimes scared, sometimes ashamed, sometimes burdened by guilt, but fully present. And that presence changes everything. If you're in a season of life where nothing fits, where every step feels heavy, yet a part of you knows you can't go back, you are exactly where you need to be. Don't doubt it. Discomfort signals activation, movement, and the dismantling of lies you once told yourself. It's the beginning of living from a place more honest, more raw, more real. Yes, you'll lose things along the way. people, securities, routines you depended on to avoid feeling. But you'll also gain space. Space to create something genuinely meaningful. Not an automatic reaction, not another mask, not a rerun of the past. That can only budge when you let the discomfort in. You can't skip it, evade it, or anesthetize it. Don't mistake discomfort for failure. Often it's the best sign there is. It's your body and mind telling you you're stirring the deep stuff. It's your soul demanding you break free of the shell you fortified over years of adapting. The most unsettling discomfort isn't what's happening to you, but what it reveals about you. Because there's no looking outward. You have to own it. Own that you must let go, unlearn, confront. And that truth never goes down easy. But when you stay, when you learn to breathe into the discomfort instead of fleeing, when you press on though nothing is clear, you begin to feel something new. Not peace or certainty, but something else. Dignity. A sense of integrity that arises from walking your own truth. And though that scares you, it also empowers you with a strength that doesn't come from outside, from fleeting motivation or immediate wins, but from your own resolve to stand firm even as the ground shakes. Real transformation happens not in your moments of clarity, but in sustained darkness. When you remain standing without a safety net, when you choose the hard path because the easy path drains your soul, when you risk dismantling the self-image that once protected you but no longer serves you. It's uncomfortable, but it liberates. Not everyone is ready for this. Not because they lack capacity, but because transformation demands a fundamental choice. A willingness to confront the unknown, rather than shoring up the same old titles and excuses. Transformation begins the moment you choose that your comfort zone no longer defines you. So don't run from discomfort. Don't cover it up. Don't trick yourself into wishing it away. Feel it, hold it, listen, because within it lies the blueprint for your next self. Not punishment, not error, but the essence of the journey. If you remain in the discomfort, in the unanswered questions and inner resistance, you are forging something more authentic. And if it doesn't disturb you, it won't transform you. Chapter 12. Success isn't visualized, it's built. You can close your eyes and dream up every detail of your ideal life. Your perfect car, your dream job, the freedom you crave, the peace you long for. You can visualize every scene as if it's already happening. You can repeat mantras, affirmations, and declarations of power. You can populate your wall with motivational quotes and scribble your goals in permanent marker. But if you don't do the work, none of it will matter. Success isn't a mental image. It isn't a vibration you attract by wanting it hard enough. It isn't about thinking positively or convincing yourself you deserve it. Real success, in any arena, is the direct outcome of a project you build one brick at a time. Daily habits, firm decisions, clear sacrifices, and unwavering will, even on days without visible progress. Success is a consequence, not a wish. And wishing alone, no matter how fashionably framed, builds nothing unless you back it up with real, repeated action. Thinking big is a good start, but it's a trap if you stay there. It makes you feel busy imagining rather than busy executing. You draft plans, you map dreams, but you aren't constructing anything. And here's the critical gap. Ideas don't change reality. Only your deeds do. That's where so many stall, confusing clarity for momentum. They believe drafting a plan is half the battle. But a plan without execution is only words on paper. And papers don't shift the world. Building success is far less glamorous than it sounds. There are no soundtrack moments, no standing ovations, no instant applause. It happens on days when you fulfill your commitments on your own, when you get up weary and do the work anyway, when you keep going without tangible wins. Because this isn't about intermittent highs. It's about steady direction. repetition, adaptation, and self-accountability. And yes, doubt will creep in, because long paths lack shortcuts. Seeing others score quick wins is discouraging, and the world's full of 5-step formulas promising overnight breakthroughs. That temptation to chase shortcuts is exactly why you must hold firm to slow, steady construction. Success of lasting value is never a gift. It's a byproduct of daily devotion to your craft. It shows up in the mundane, the mornings you wake up before dawn, the late nights spent refining your skill, the early no you give to distractions so you can say a stronger yes later. It's the internal trust you build when you keep your word to yourself. No one else even knows you're doing it, but that inner consistency molds character and resilience no inspiration alone could. Beware the illusion of manifesting success through thought alone. While visionary thinking sparks direction, without actual sweat equity, it remains fantasy. True progress requires you to sit down, structure your steps, execute, measure, adjust, and do it again tomorrow and the next day. That's the unglamorous secret to real impact. Discipline over desire, routine over mood, committed action over episodic enthusiasm. This isn't a call to burnout or toxic hustle. It's a reminder that your spirit craves structure. You can't rely solely on fleeting motivation. You need a framework, a method, a repeated practice. That's how talent sharpens, precision forms, and dreams materialize. By honest, uncelebrated work. The problem with fixating on visualization is it robs you of your present duties. While you craft mental movies of triumph, you can be neglecting the basic tasks: planning, organizing, executing, reviewing. That behind-the-scenes grind doesn't sell well on social media, but it's the bedrock of every success story. Habits compound. Day after day, they transform ordinary folks into extraordinary ones. And living this doesn't preclude joy. In fact, it cultivates a deeper satisfaction, the kind born of knowing you've earned every victory. Not through luck or by appealing to the algorithm, but through your clarity, your tenacity, your prioritizing what matters above the glitter of instant validation. So stop treating success like a revelation that descends from on high. It isn't a lottery or a bolt of luck. It's the natural outcome of small, consistent choices. How you allocate your time, how you channel your energy, what you tell yourself each morning, of what you embrace and what you choose to cut, not out of guilt, but from the resolve to build something real. If today you see no results, if everything still feels distant, know this: every action counts, every step adds up. Every firm yes to your process and every no to a distraction cements your future. It may not be flashy, but it is transformative. Because success isn't about seeing it in your mind. It's about putting it in your legs, your hands, your daily grind. And that's the only kind of success that lasts. Chapter 13. Nobody's coming to save you. No one is coming. No hero will burst through the door with all the answers. No one will hold you up on your darkest days unless first you hold yourself up. This isn't pessimism, it's reality. At first it stings, but then it frees you, because you've always known it deep down. You just resisted admitting it. We grow up believing that someday something or someone will rescue us. That if we're good, obedient, patient, someone will reward us with peace, validation, love. As if life were one long exam where if we toe the line, we'll earn a medal at the end. But life doesn't work that way. The world doesn't reward waiters. It favors those who take ownership. Taking ownership starts with acknowledging that no one will fix what you won't face. No one will organize your emotions, heal your wounds, or compensate for years of delay. No one will champion your needs more than you will. It's not that you don't matter. It's that no one can live your life for you, make your choices, or risk on your behalf. The truest mark of maturity isn't knowledge. It's giving up the waiting. letting go of projections onto others for what only you can give yourself. Stopping the expectation that a partner completes you, a boss validates you, a friend drops everything for you. Others can support you, yes, but they cannot save you, because salvation demands personal accountability. And personal accountability is on you. The most self-respecting act isn't blamelessness. It's owning your story. Because if you keep waiting for someone else to intervene, time slips by and your ability to shape your destiny evaporates. While you passive wait for rescue, your spark dims. Your creativity, your fire, your vision, all cool under the weight of unmet expectations. Awareness of this truth shifts everything. You can no longer blame external forces. You can no longer plead lack of luck or that nobody understands you. Yes, those may be true, but still only you can act on your reality. Your power rests in what you choose to do with what you have today. Nothing more, nothing less. You become resilient when you stop hunting saviors and start becoming your own refuge. Not as an empty slogan, but as a daily discipline. A promise you keep, a decision you honor. Sometimes, though, you're the only witness. Because if you won't rescue yourself, no one else will. You rescue yourself by looking fearlessly inward, by speaking your truth, by taking that first shaky step toward healing. That changes everything, because you no longer beg for attention, approval, or validation. You cease to operate from lack and start operating from self-selection. You select yourself each time you refuse to return to what hurt you. Each time you say no, despite possible disappointment. Each time you honor your needs rather than stay small for comfort. Yes, you may feel alone at first, because in ending your dependence you'll test some relationships, but that's part of growth. Giving up anesthesia for the rawness of life. In the loneliness, you'll discover a new calm, the quiet confidence that you can rely on yourself. Not because you never falter, but because you choose to stand again every time you do. That inner steadiness changes everything, not externally, but internally. And what grows inside eventually echoes outward. There's no magic rescue, no perfect savior, no appointed day when you'll finally be saved. Only you, with all you are, with your strengths, flaws, and yet untapped courage, can be your turning point. And that is no burden. It's your power. There will be days you want to give up. Days you look outward for a helping hand. If one appears, be thankful. But if not, keep moving. Don't let absence excuse you into stillness. You're doing this for yourself, and you've waited long enough. For waiting is just a slow, silent surrender, and you're not here to surrender. You're here to transform from the inside out. Yes, it's exhausting, but it's real. In that reality, even amid the pain, there's a freedom no one else can bestow. Because once you learn you don't need saving, that you're the one in charge, you begin acting from root strength, not from expectation. And what you build from that place has its own integrity. There is no automatic redemption, no external hero, no perfect timing. There is only you, with all your history, all your potential, and the daily choice to move forward. That choice, though uneasy, is the greatest gift you can give yourself. Chapter 14. Fear isn't eliminated. It's managed. It never goes away. No matter how much you work through it, how often you face it, how keenly you analyze it, fear never vanishes completely. It isn't a bug to fix, nor a flaw you can permanently erase. Fear is part of your design. And if you don't learn to live with it, you'll spend your life trying to banish something impossible to banish, only to end up believing you're stuck because you're still afraid, as if fear itself were a failure. But fear isn't your enemy. How you treat it is. If untreated, fear morphs into a polished excuse, a seemingly sound reason to stand still. It becomes a subtle voice that sounds reasonable, but only wants to keep you safe. Safe from exposure, from failure, from stepping out of the known. And while that safety feels comforting, it's also a prison. Your task isn't to annihilate fear, but to put it in its place. Hear its message without letting it pick your path. Fear has a role. It alerts you to genuine risks. Sometimes it's accurate, but often it's an old alarm wired to past pain. If you let it run unchecked, it hijacks your present with echoes of yesterday's dangers. You end up living as if the same threats still loom long after they've faded. Managing fear means seeing it for what it is, stripping away its drama, and then acting anyway. You pierce its illusion through movement, by doing despite the tremble, by naming your fear and walking straight through it. Only then do you realize the monster was smaller than you imagined. Managing fear isn't mindless impulsivity. It's not pretending it doesn't exist. It's not reckless. It's a partnership. You listen to fear's concern. You weigh its validity. Then you decide that your purpose matters more. You don't need permission from your emotions to proceed. You acknowledge them, but you appoint your will as the captain. Don't mistake fear's presence for failure to grow. The very presence of fear often means you're on the brink of something meaningful. If you felt no fear, you'd probably be playing it too safe, or doing something that doesn't matter enough. But when real stakes are on the line, fear shows up to remind you of what's at risk. Your measure of courage isn't a fear-free life. It's action in the face of fear, choosing to advance anyway. Even a single bold decision can reshape your trajectory. Those seconds of choice break old patterns and chart new territory. And you don't outrun the fear. You outlast it by refusing its veto. This is practice, not a one-time ritual. You'll never arrive at zero fear. Instead, you train yourself to carry it lightly, to treat it as one more voice at the table, not the voice in charge. The more you do this, the more you strengthen the part of you that steps forward regardless of your emotional weather. You don't have to be fearless. You only need to be determined. Determined enough to act on your truth, even as your fear protests. That's where real freedom lives, not in comfort, but in standing your ground with fear on equal footing. So stop judging yourself for still feeling afraid. Stop beating yourself up for not vanishing your fear entirely. You never will, but you can learn to hold it in your hand without letting it drive the car. That's the only way you keep moving, day after day, decision after decision, no matter how daunting the road ahead. Chapter 15. You don't need more time. You need more courage. You're not short on hours. That day has 24 for everyone. What you lack is resolve. You aren't trapped by your calendar, your schedule, or your responsibilities. You're trapped by the stories you tell yourself every time a part of you demands change, and you choose to say, "Not yet. I need more clarity. The timing's off. I've got too much on my plate. After this." You've been telling yourself, "Someday," for years. And each time you say later, you know it's a lie. If you don't act now, you won't act tomorrow. What you're postponing isn't a task, it's a decision. You don't need more time, you need more courage. The bravery to face what you've been sidestepping, to make that cut, to begin that project, to have that talk, to stop adapting to a script that doesn't fit you, to take full ownership of your life's steering wheel. Movement always carries a price, and you know it. That's why you delay. Because you sense that real change costs you comfort, safety, familiarity. You'd rather wait in your known cage than face the uncertainty beyond its bars. Yet waiting costs you more each day. The loss of momentum, the erosion of confidence, the slow extinguishing of your own spark. No one's going to give you perfect conditions. No cosmic alignment is coming to make it easy. If time were the real obstacle, you'd have found a way by now. rescheduled, reorganized, reprioritized. You haven't, not because you cannot, but because you don't dare. You dread the aftermath of change more than you resent the status quo. But the price of waiting is steep. You lose years of your life in cautious procrastination. You bleed potential through the cracks of not yet. That bleeding leaves a dull ache, a sense of life half-lived, until you can't ignore it any longer. You realize time passed while you rehearsed your plans instead of executing them. The moment you admit you don't need more time but more guts, you break the cycle. You stop bargaining with your life's calendar. You stop making excuses dressed in logic. You stop negotiating with your fear. You commit fully to action, right now, with whatever you have at this moment. It isn't about reckless leaps. It's about firm decisions. A decisive enough that marks a before and after, even if it's invisible to others. It's honestly surveying your life and asking, how many of these delays are out of real necessity, and how many are fear in disguise? Then you choose whether to continue hiding or to act anyway. Yes, change demands courage because it disrupts your equilibrium. But the discomfort of transformation is still less costly than the slow decay of unfulfilled dreams. You don't need more clarity about every step. You need clarity about your commitment to move, no matter what. Once you decide, you find a way. You figure out logistics. You shift priorities. You tackle the first small action. Your life won't wait for you to feel ready. It happens now, or you keep waiting. And the longer you wait, the weightier the what-ifs become. But notice this. To begin, you don't need every answer. You only need a single yes. A yes to yourself, to your purpose, to the discomfort you know is required. So stop letting later rule you. Stop constructing polished arguments to delay your own breakthrough. Stop hiding behind planning when what really needs to happen is doing. You have the same 24 hours as everyone else. What you need is the courage to refuse any excuse, fear, confusion, uncertainty, and to step forward anyway. When you do, everything shifts. Not because time has suddenly expanded, but because you've broken through your own barrier. You start moving, and movement changes your world. It generates momentum. It births new clarity. It shows you what's truly possible the moment you choose to act. And that choice, however small, is the one thing that never runs out of time. Chapter 16. Your environment is not an excuse. It's a mirror. No, your environment is not the reason you're stuck. It's not your family's fault, nor your friends, nor your bosses, nor your cities, nor the state of the world's. Your environment doesn't make decisions for you. It doesn't drag your choices out of you. It doesn't limit your moves beyond what you allow. Your environment isn't a trap. It's a mirror, a clear reflection of what you permit, what you uphold, what you silently tolerate. Your environment doesn't stop you. It only shows you where you stand. And understanding this completely shifts your perspective, because it stops being about finding someone to blame and starts being about taking responsibility. Owning that what surrounds you, to a very large extent, connects to what you've chosen, what you attract, what you accept. It's not punishment. It's not karma. It's coherence. If you live surrounded by mediocrity, it's probably because parts of you are still choosing the easy path. If you live surrounded by complaints, maybe it's because you too have normalized living from that place. And if you don't cut ties, if you don't correct course, if you don't reposition yourself, nothing will change. There is no personal transformation without reviewing your environment, because what surrounds you influences you far more than you think. It conditions you. It shapes you. And I'm not just talking about the physical. I'm talking about the messages you receive every day, the conversations you keep repeating, the relationships you maintain by inertia, the silent pacts you make to avoid rocking the boat, to avoid being left out, to keep fitting into a structure that no longer represents you. And the more you try to grow within that, the more everything strains. because you can't truly grow if you keep everything else intact. But it's comfortable to say you can't change because your environment isn't supportive. That you can't move forward because nobody backs you. That you can't take the leap because everything around you pulls you down. And yes, your environment may be harsh. You may lack role models nearby. You may be surrounded by people who don't understand your process. But that's not a sentence. It's a fact. A starting point, not an excuse. When you truly take responsibility, you stop asking your environment for permission to be who you are. You stop waiting for approval. You stop seeking validation. And above all, you stop using it as a shield. Because you know that, although it influences, it doesn't decide for you. You decide whether to keep toxic conversations going. You decide whether to keep accepting what drains you. You decide whether to stay in the same place or take a step aside, even if they criticize you, even if they judge you, even if they don't understand. Your environment is an uncomfortable mirror because it shows your tolerance, it shows your fears, it shows your lack of boundaries, it confronts you with your own incoherence. Because if you complain about what surrounds you, yet keep being part of it without moving a single piece, the problem isn't the environment. The problem is that you haven't decided to leave it. You haven't assumed the cost of choosing something different. Because choosing differently hurts. It requires loss. It requires distance. It requires going through the awkward silence of no longer fitting in. And that's where many get stuck. Because they'd rather stay among the known than risk the discomfort of the new. They'd rather keep sharing complaints out loud than make decisions quietly. They'd rather adapt their growth to what their environment can accept than break with everything and start from scratch. But you can't build something authentic if all you do is keep pretending. When you decide to genuinely change, your environment trembles. Not because it's evil, but because it's reorganizing. Because you can't keep pretending. Because what you once tolerated now irritates you. Because what you once silenced now burns your tongue. Because what once seemed normal now feels unbearable. And that's not arrogance. It's evolution. It's simply realizing that you're no longer in the same internal place. And if the environment doesn't move with you, you'll have to move yourself. And that's not selfishness. It's responsibility. You can't change your life if you're surrounded by people who sabotage every step you take. You can't heal if you share your days with those who constantly remind you that you won't make it. You can't move forward if your conversations revolve around fear, resignation, mediocrity. Because what you hear every day sticks inside you, reprograms you, conditions you more than you can imagine. That doesn't mean you have to cut off everything or live isolated. It means you must be selective. You have to set filters. You have to guard what you let in. Because if you don't, no matter how much you work on yourself, your environment will end up dragging you back to the place you're trying to leave. Not because it has power, but because you give it power every time you choose not to confront, not to filter, not to protect your energy. The environment isn't an excuse. It's a diagnosis. It tells you what you're aligned with. It shows whether you've truly changed or have merely changed your rhetoric. Because when you really change, it shows. You can't maintain bonds that no longer fit your values. You can't share space with someone who no longer respects you. You can't keep pretending there's a connection where there's none. And when you acknowledge that, the question is no longer, why am I surrounded by this? The question is, what part of me is still allowing it? And that's where real change begins. When you stop blaming the environment and start redrawing your boundaries. When you decide you will prioritize coherence over comfort. When you understand that every time you choose the familiar just to avoid conflict, you're halting your own process. And that, inside you feel. Even if you don't say it, even if you hide it, your body notices, Your energy knows it. Your clarity clouds over. So look around. Not to complain, not to judge. Look at it as at a mirror that doesn't lie. And if you don't like what you see, if something grates, if something repeats, if something weighs you down, don't wait for it to change by itself. Move. Choose differently. Let go. Take risks. Because until you do, the environment won't yield. Not because it's stronger than you, but because it reflects what you haven't changed yet. Chapter 17. Your identity is not written in stone. You are not what you think you are. Or at least not permanently. You are not your label. You are not your story. You are not the version you built just to survive. And no matter how much you cling to an idea of yourself, no matter how much you repeat phrases to justify your patterns, no matter how fiercely you defend what you do, as if it were your essence, the truth is you're changing, whether you realize it or not, whether you resist it or not. And even if your environment keeps reminding you who you've always been, you are no longer that. Because identity is not fixed. It's not a stone carved by chisels. It's clay. And like any clay, it takes the shape of the hands that mold it. The question is, whose hands are they? Because if they're not yours, others are shaping you. Culture, family, past experiences, wounds, fears. All of that built a version of you that functioned for a time. One that protected you, helped you adapt, gave you some consistency. But it may now be obsolete. It may be holding you back from who you could be now. And that's where many lock themselves in. Because they confuse identity with loyalty. Because they think changing is betraying themselves. As if not holding the same opinions you had 5 years ago were a lack of integrity. As if evolving meant incoherence. But it doesn't. On the contrary, changing when your environment doesn't is not betrayal. It's self-respect. It's refusing to stay anchored to an idea that no longer makes sense. It's having the courage to look within and admit that what represented you yesterday limits you today. But of course, changing your identity means losing certainties. It means not knowing exactly who you are for a while. It means hearing things like, "You weren't like this before," or "Have you lost your mind?" or "What happened to you?" Because many would rather you stayed the same, not because they want the best for you, but because your change disrupts their own stability. Because if you break the mold, they no longer have excuses to stay within theirs. Then you must choose. Either you stay where you no longer fit for fear of being questioned, or you risk rebuilding yourself, even if that means disappointing people. And that choice, though it seems simple, is one of the hardest you'll ever make. Because part of you wants to move, but another part clings. Clings to, "I am like this," as if it were sacred truth, as if repeating it gave you identity, weight, belonging. But in reality, it chains you. No one is born with a fixed identity. You build it. And that means you can rebuild it, over and over as needed. Not out of whim, but out of coherence. Because what you need today doesn't have to resemble what you needed before. Because what you desire today doesn't have to match what you dreamed of yesterday. Because your way of loving, working, choosing, inhabiting the world can transform. And if you deny yourself that right, you're amputating yourself without noticing. Your identity is not written in stone. Yet many live as if it were, as if moving internally meant renouncing everything, as if being steady were more dignified than being honest. And that's dangerous, because it makes you sustain what you no longer are out of fear of judgment. And sooner or later, what you sustain consumes you. Pretending to be someone you're not exhausts you more than facing the uncertainty of the new. Changing your identity doesn't mean destroying yourself. It means shedding what no longer serves you. It means dropping costumes. It means undoing narratives that may never have belonged to you. Because often your "I am like this" didn't come from you. It came from what others said about you, from what you decided to be to fit in, from labels stuck on you since childhood that you repeated until you believed them. But that isn't essence. That's repetition. And repeating isn't living, it's surviving. And you're not here to survive. You're here to live fully, to allow yourself to be different, even if that breaks others' image of you, to explore new versions, even without guarantees they'll please anyone. Because it's not about pleasing. It's about being at peace with yourself when the lights go out, about not having to justify yourself all the time, about feeling that the way you speak, choose, work, breathe, aligns with who you truly are today. It's not about changing for the sake of change. It's about evaluating whether the identity you defend still makes sense, whether it represents you or merely protects you, whether it liberates you or just accommodates you. Because if it only accommodates you, sooner or later you stagnate. And when you stagnate, everything starts to fade. Your curiosity, passion, energy. Because nothing within you was meant to stay still, much less your identity. That's why it's so important to make room for the new, not from emptiness, but from awareness. To choose what you want to keep, which parts of you still have life and which need to be released, which attitudes, habits, or ways of relating come from your truth and which are inherited burdens. And you do that with honesty, without drama, without needing to destroy everything, simply from clarity, from that intimate place where you allow yourself to look without fear at who you are and who you could begin to be. And then, something happens. You start to feel lighter. Not because you have all the answers, but because you no longer need to defend an image. Because you no longer hide behind, "I am like this," every time someone questions you. Because you begin to live yourself with room to evolve, with space for mistakes, with permission to try, fail, and rebuild. Because you know that what changes doesn't weaken you. It defines you more truthfully. You are not a stone. You are not here merely to fit in. You are here to expand, to evolve unapologetically, to choose again and again who you want to be without forgetting your history. Because your story doesn't chain you, it informs you, and you decide whether to repeat it or honor it with something new. Chapter 18. If you don't make anyone uncomfortable, you betray yourself. Living without making anyone uncomfortable is a trap dressed as virtue. It's a socially applauded ideal that hides a deep renunciation, that of your authenticity. Because no one can be completely true to themselves and slip quietly into every context. No one can choose their truth without ruffling feathers. No one can be free without paying the price of unsettling those who prefer you to remain functional, predictable, harmless. From childhood, we're trained to be likable, to be correct, to avoid stirring the waters. We're taught to say what's expected, act as expected, respond without breaking patterns. And little by little, we learn that pleasing is safer than being ourselves. That avoiding tension is better than defending our stance. That nodding in agreement is more comfortable than confronting. But that comfort has an internal cost we often don't see from the outside. It's paid within, with guilt, exhaustion, a growing sense that you're not where you should be, that you're playing a character who no longer represents you. Because when you stop making anyone uncomfortable just to please, you begin to betray yourself. Maybe in small things, that forced laugh, that yes you wish had been a no, that silence chosen to avoid conflict, and sometimes in bigger ways, a life that doesn't fulfill you, a relationship that no longer makes sense, a career you chose for applause rather than passion. And all of that accumulates an emotional bill that eventually comes due. Because no one can live in coherence if they're constantly stepping on themselves to fit in. Making others uncomfortable is not violence. It's not imposition. It's not destruction. Making others uncomfortable is simply being so yourself that those unprepared are shaken. And that's part of the process. When you decide to live in truth, not everyone will understand. And they don't have to. You don't live to be understood. You live not to fail yourself. You live to build a version of you that doesn't need to hide. And that sometimes means disappointing, sometimes losing, sometimes being alone for a while. But only from there can you build something that truly sustains you from within. The fear of making others uncomfortable is, at its core, fear of rejection. And that fear is as human as it is limiting, because it can keep you spinning for years around others' expectations, adapting your tone, your energy, your choices, just to avoid judgment. And judgment will come anyway, even if you do everything right, even if you strive not to bother anyone, because those who need to judge you will do so anyway, and those who need to control you will always find an excuse to criticize your freedom. So why all the effort to fit molds you don't even respect? The value of making others uncomfortable lies in what it activates. When you stand in clarity, others are forced to look at themselves, because your presence no longer conforms, no longer asks permission, no longer hides. And that, though tense, also sparks transformation. Not just in you, but in your environment. Often it takes just one person daring to break the pattern for others to start questioning. And if they don't, that's not your responsibility. Your only responsibility is not to stop being who you need to be out of fear of displeasing. And yes, it's uncomfortable, because we're programmed to seek belonging. But there's a big difference between belonging and dissolving, between sharing and vanishing, between fitting in and erasing yourself. And many confuse one for the other. They dissolve into groups, relationships, ideologies, routines where they only feel valid if they don't make waves. But what they fail to see is that their validity is borrowed. It depends on not moving too much, not questioning, not growing faster than others, and that suffocates over time. When you decide to unsettle with your presence, your opinions, your freedom, your boundaries, you're not trying to provoke. You're doing it because you understand you can no longer dim yourself to preserve others' peace. You do it because there are things inside you that can no longer stay silent. You do it because you finally understood there's no peace more expensive than that bought with your silence. And it shows in your energy, your stance, your way of being. It's obvious that you're no longer willing to betray yourself to maintain an artificial harmony that no longer represents you. And it's okay if some people step away, if some get offended, if some don't understand. That's the inevitable consequence of authenticity. Not everyone is ready to see you unfiltered, but you are ready not to filter yourself, because every time you do, you lose strength, not through rigidity, but through truth. From that place where you don't need a mask to be accepted, from which you know that, even if you lose connections, you gain something far more valuable: integrity. Unsettling is part of the journey of anyone tired of living to please. And those who never unsettle anyone do so because they've stopped listening to themselves, because they've confused being good with being obedient, because they've decided it's better to fade a little each day than risk being misunderstood. But living that way isn't life. It's acting. It's emotional survival. And you're not here to survive. You're here to experience your existence in authenticity, even if it stirs things up. It's not about living at odds with the world. It's about living reconciled with yourself. And that sometimes makes noise outside. But if you're at peace inside, you can handle the noise. Because you know you're not being aggressive, you're being clear. And that clarity, though it may annoy, also inspires, also liberates, also opens paths for you and for those who observe you with a courage they haven't yet allowed themselves. Because when you dare, you give permission without speaking. You become an example without preaching. And that kind of example doesn't need applause. It doesn't need consensus. It only needs coherence. Because living coherently has a price, yes. But living without it has a much higher cost. The daily betrayal of who you are. And that betrayal, even if no one sees it, you feel it in the form of anxiety, sadness, apathy, fatigue that no rest can cure. Because you're not tired from what you do. You're tired from all you suppress to avoid making waves. So don't apologize for your evolution. Don't lower your gaze when someone says, "You've changed." That's a sign you're on track, that you're shifting structures, that you're no longer operating as a useful cog in systems you no longer wish to sustain. And if that unsettles, perfect. You didn't come here to confirm others' ideas. You came to be who you truly are, and being so sometimes upsets. Chapter 19. The universe responds to those who dare. Some people spend their lives waiting for signs, wanting certainty before they move, needing guarantees, constantly asking whether they're on the right path, whether it's the right time, whether it's the right thing, whether it's enough. As if the universe were an oracle that only speaks when everything lines up. As if opportunities came wrapped in absolute clarity. As if confirmation had to come from outside. But that's not how it works. The universe doesn't reward passivity. It doesn't respond to those who wait. It doesn't unleash its power for those who stand still. The universe, life, reality, the field, call it what you will, moves when you move. It reacts to your action, to your decision, to your presence, to your inner clarity expressed in motion. Not in desire, not in theory, not in endless visualizations that never end in anything. In decisions, in steps, in risk. And many don't like hearing this because it means leaving the comfort zone of dreaming without paying the price of doing. Because daring has consequences. It exposes you. It changes you. It strips away the protection of perpetual doubt. Because when you dare, you declare, "This is what I want. This is what I choose. This is what I'm building." And if it goes wrong, you can no longer blame anything or anyone. You can't hide behind, "It wasn't the right time. I wasn't sure. I was waiting for a sign." You're in it. And that exposure is scary, which is why so many prefer the anteroom. But what they don't realize is that waiting also has a cost. A slow, silent, corrosive cost. The cost of seeing opportunities pass by because you didn't claim them. The cost of watching others move ahead, not because they're better, but because they dared. The cost of living on pause, waiting to feel ready, as if readiness were a destination rather than something built as you go. Because what really prepares you isn't thinking, it's doing. When you decide to act from courage, without having everything clear, the universe responds. Not because you're special, not because you deserve it more, but because you've shown you're willing to hold whatever comes. That you no longer ask for guaranteed outcomes. That you say, "I'm here, I'm going for it, even without all the answers." And that, energetically, makes a huge difference. Because you've stopped hiding. Life doesn't give you what you dream of. It gives you what you're willing to sustain. It gives you what you have the courage to ask for, build, assume. And that means exposing yourself, making uncomfortable decisions, letting go of securities, disappointing those who expected you to stay predictable. But there is no expansion without discomfort, no manifestation without movement. You can't attract something without having made real space for it to arrive. Not from the mind, but from action. There comes a point when you understand that the jump isn't when you feel ready. It's when you're fed up with paralysis, when you can't wait any longer, when you realize you're losing more by staying than by risking. And once you reach that point, you don't need more signs, because the real yes doesn't come from outside. It comes from inside. And when that yes appears, everything changes. The universe won't give you confirmation before you move. Confirmation comes afterward, sometimes with results, sometimes with challenges, but always with information. Because even if you fail, you've gained something you wouldn't have from waiting. Experience, insight, resolve, direction. But that only happens when you've had the courage to risk failure. And here's something few understand. Failing isn't falling back. It's moving forward with data, clearing the path, learning what works and what doesn't. But if you don't move, if you don't try, if you don't face it, you'll never know. And you'll remain trapped in the illusion of possibility, in the comfortable realm of imagination, where everything seems prettier because it hasn't been tested. But that's not living. It's a bubble, and sooner or later it bursts. Daring is declaring, telling life what you want without needing external validation. Committing to something that doesn't yet exist, but can only be born if you do your part. Planting your flag, even if your voice trembles, even if you have doubts, even if you don't know how it will turn out. Because what really moves energy isn't desire, it's your commitment to that desire. And that commitment manifests in motion. The universe doesn't activate with your good intentions. It activates with your brave actions, with your firm presence, with your willingness to stand by your decisions even when no one applauds, even when you seem to go against the current, even when what you do has no immediate echo. Because the echo comes, sometimes later, sometimes in another form, but it comes. And it comes not because you waited, but because you provoked it. That doesn't mean everything will go well. It doesn't mean the road will be smooth. It means you'll have broken the greatest barrier, inertia. And once you break inertia, once you act from authenticity without waiting for guarantees, the rest begins to fall into place. Maybe not as you expected, but as you need. Because what follows daring, however hard, always takes you one step closer to your truth. So don't wait for more signs. You are the one who must give the signal. You are the one who must declare, choose, cut, propose, launch yourself. Because if you don't, no one will. No one will give you clarity. No one will come to confirm anything. The universe only aligns when you align with what you say you want. And that shows not in what you think, but in what you do when no one's watching. It's not about having all the answers. It's about taking the step with the ones you have. About daring to lose the unnecessary to gain the essential. About understanding that you won't be rescued. That you don't need to feel brave to move. That bravery comes afterward, as a reward, as a consequence. But the first step is yours. And if you take it, if you truly dare, you'll see that the universe doesn't hesitate to respond. Not because it owes you, but because you finally stopped hiding. Chapter 20. The point of no return. You can't go back anymore. There is a moment, though you might not see it coming, when you stop being who you were. Not because you planned it, not because someone told you, not because you marked it on a calendar. It's an internal point, an invisible crossroads. Something inside breaks. Something no longer fits the way it used to. And there's no turning back. You've crossed the threshold. And when you do, you know it. You feel it in your body, in the way you look at things, in the silence you leave after certain conversations. It's not that you suddenly become a different person. It's that you can no longer sustain certain things with the same face. You can no longer swallow the same stories. You can't pretend you haven't seen what you saw, felt what you felt, that you don't care what now matters so much. Because something has been activated. And even if you try to turn it off, even if you long for comfort, Even if you want to return to what once worked, you no longer fit there. And that's not a mistake. It's growth. Chapter 20. The point of no return. You can't go back anymore. There is a moment, often without warning, when you stop being who you were. Not because you planned it, not because someone told you, not because you marked a date on the calendar. It's an internal shift, an invisible crossroads. Something breaks inside you. Something no longer fits. You've crossed the threshold, and when you do, you know it. You feel it in your body, in the way you look at things, in the silence you leave after certain conversations. It's not that you suddenly become a different person. It's that you can no longer sustain certain things with the same ease. You can't swallow the same stories, pretend you haven't seen what you saw, ignore what you felt, or dismiss what now matters so deeply. Because something has awakened. And even if you try to turn it off, even if you long for the comfort of the past, you no longer fit there. And that isn't a mistake. It's growth. The point of no return doesn't announce itself. It isn't elegant or comfortable. Sometimes it arrives as chaos. Sometimes as a brutal disappointment. Sometimes as a silent decision in the middle of an ordinary day. But when it happens, everything changes. Though you may remain in the same place, you're not the same inside. A new restlessness, a different hunger, an unfamiliar sense of unease takes hold. And that, initially heavy, soon becomes your driving force. Yes, at first it's frightening. You realize you've left behind a version of yourself you knew by heart, yet the new version isn't fully formed. You're caught between two worlds, too far from the old to go back, too uncertain of the new to feel at ease. There are no maps, no instructions, only intuition, courage, presence, and an unspoken but irrevocable decision. You will not return. That moment you cross, though painful, is one of the most powerful experiences you can have. It's when you accept you cannot keep postponing what you know. You won't keep blaming the past. You won't keep negotiating with outdated parts of yourself just to fit into structures that no longer represent you. You decide to build your life from a new truth, even if you don't yet know where to begin. And it's important to understand, you don't need everything figured out to embrace the point of no return. You only need to be determined, knowing that what you leave behind no longer holds anything for you. Even if there were good times, even if there are bonds that hurt to sever, even if there are stories still tugging at you, you no longer belong to that version. Holding on to the past while pushing forward is the most dangerous trap of all. You can't build what's next if you keep looking back, not because you must reject your history, but because if you keep staring at it for excuses, it becomes a prison. And you're not here to repeat patterns. You're here to break them. To choose which parts of you stay and which must be renewed, even if it means losses. Because once you've crossed that line, things will fall away. People will disappear. Relationships you can't sustain will end. Mindsets that no longer serve you will dissolve. And yes, it may hurt. Often it hurts most to admit you were the one who let go, because you knew you couldn't grow within it. Growth hurts, but stagnation hurts more, slowly, drop by drop. And you're already beyond that place. You can't pretend nothing has changed. You arrive at an internal space where there's no room for pretense. You no longer seek permission to be yourself. You no longer believe the old justifications. You know that stepping back would betray you. And you can't unknow that. That is the point of no return. When the veil drops, when you can no longer keep repeating old habits or excuses because you're no longer who you were. And that, though uneasy, is freedom. True freedom isn't doing whatever you want without consequences. It's choosing who you will be when no one tells you what to do. When the path depends solely on you. When your former self is gone and the new one is still in the making. That in-between place is hard, but it's the most honest, because everything you do from there is truly yours, unborrowed, unforced, chosen. Now you're here, facing yourself, carrying your past and its lessons, certain you can't go back, even if you don't yet know exactly where you're headed. But that doesn't matter. That uncertainty is not a problem. It's a blank canvas that belongs to you. You won't have all the answers, and you don't need them. What you do need is to stay true to yourself, not negotiate with what you already know, not stay still when something inside demands movement. You're on the other side now. Fear may visit, noise may swirl, some may try to pull you back, but you've decided, in ways unseen by others, that this is irrevocable. And that decision, though silent, changes everything. Don't shrink to fit old versions of yourself. Don't dim your spark. Don't adapt out of habit. Don't extinguish what's been ignited. You can't go back. And that is the greatest gift you've been given. And that concludes this journey. If this audiobook has stirred something in you, if any word made you stop, question, see things differently, then it has fulfilled its purpose. Because it wasn't about giving you answers, but about opening spaces. Not about motivating you from the outside, but reminding you of what's inside you, what perhaps you'd forgotten. Now that you've listened to it all, you know you can't go back. Not after seeing with new eyes. Not after voicing what you've long kept silent. The path continues, but no longer from the same place. Now it's truly yours. If this content has accompanied you, pushed you, or simply made you reflect, I invite you to leave a comment. I'm interested in your truth, your experience, what this journey has meant to you. And if you want more direct, unvarnished, purposeful content, subscribe. Because this doesn't end here. It's just beginning. Thank you for being here, for listening to yourself, for daring. See you very soon.